We tend to imagine freedom as having no rules, no schedule, nobody telling you what to do, and basically being able to do whatever we want whenever we want. I can understand why that sounds like freedom, but take the idea far enough and I think it very quickly becomes chaos. If you sleep whenever you want, eat whatever you want, spend whatever you want, scroll whenever you want, and give in to every temptation that comes your way, are you actually free? Or are you simply being controlled by your own impulses? Or maybe worse, controlled by somebody else who understands how to take advantage of those impulses. The army was massive for being a little cog in a very big machine. There was definitely decentralized leadership and times where you were expected to think for yourself, but at the same time, it was probably one of the most structural environments I've ever experienced. There were timings for everything, standards for everything, routines, rehearsals, responsibilities, and correct ways of doing things. Sometimes to a ridiculous extent. But strangely enough, a lot of the structure taught me habits that later gave me a lot more control over my own life. So that's what I want to provide, the groundwork for today and break down. Maybe freedom isn't actually the absence of boundaries. Maybe good boundaries are what makes freedom possible. Because I think there's actually a massive difference between somebody else controlling every aspect of your life and you having enough discipline to put your own life in order. One removes your freedom while the other can actually protect it. My first point I want to tackle is simply that order creates freedom. Military life puts order to practically everything you do. The timings, equipment, routines, preparation, and standards. It can definitely seem excessive from the outside looking in, and sometimes it feels excessive when you're actually doing it. But there's a reason behind much of it. Your kit is always in the same place and laid out in the correct order because when you actually need it, you shouldn't have to think about where it is. You prepare the night before because tomorrow already has enough problems. You know the correct rules and courses of action for when a situation arises, because when the time comes, you might need to act at a moment's notice. Rehearsing is beaten into you. You rehearse and rehearse until you know exactly what to do. If something happens, you aren't standing there trying to invent a plan while the problem is unfolding in front of you. You already thought of it, you've already practiced it, you already know the person to your left and right and what they're doing, and you've already prepared for all the possibilities that could happen. There is still room to think and adapt, but you've removed a whole heap of unnecessary decisions before you ever get to that point. I think that's one of the most useful things I've taken from the military life. Order removes unnecessary decisions. And when you remove all those unnecessary decisions, you suddenly have a lot more room to focus on the decisions that actually matter. Your brain isn't occupied to trying to remember where you put something, what you need to bring, what time you're supposed to leave, and what you're supposed to do next. You've already squared that all away. I've adopted this heavily into my civilian life, and I've spoken about it countless times. Clothes ready the night before so I don't have to think about it. Meals prepped so there is no decision to make when I'm hungry. Routine alarms set on my phone so I don't forget when I need to do a certain habit or take a certain supplement. Finances under control with a Excel spreadsheet, breaking everything down so I actually know where my money is going instead of hoping for the best at the end of every month. Even something as simple as writing tomorrow's tasks in my journal the night before means I can wake up and know what needs to be done. None of these things are particularly exciting. Nobody's going to make a cinematic montage of themselves setting an alarm and preparing their clothes for tomorrow. But these boring little acts create breathing room. They give you freedom somewhere else. You spend a few minutes preparing tonight and you've made tomorrow's morning easier. You spend an hour preparing meals and you've removed countless decisions throughout the week. That's why I always come back to the idea that success often begins before the actual event. The work you do beforehand creates the freedom you have when the moment arrives. Order also stops small problems from becoming massive ones. If your entire life is disorganized, you're constantly reacting to every situation. You're always chasing something, forgetting something, fixing something, or arriving late. When your life has order, You can stop reacting to everything around you and you can actually begin acting intentionally. The next thing I want to tackle is that sometimes you need boundaries against yourself. People often think boundaries restrict freedom, but some boundaries actually protect your freedom. You don't need somebody else controlling your life for you to lose control of it. Your own impulses can do that perfectly well. The mobile phone is the most simplest example we have today. It's an incredible tool when you think about it, right? You have access to almost endless information sitting inside your pocket. You could use that little device to learn another language, read scripture, learn about finance, build a business, speak to family on the other side of the world, educate yourself about practically anything, and drastically change your life for the better. But technically, you're also completely free to sit on there and scroll for 4 to 5 hours, you name it. Nobody's stopping you. You have all the freedom in the world to keep swiping your thumb upwards. But if you can't put the thing down, how free are you? And that can apply to whatever temptation somebody struggles with. Doing whatever you feel like isn't necessarily freedom. Sometimes it's slavery to the appetite. If every time an impulse appears, you immediately obey it, then that impulse has some level of control over you. A disciplined person needs to be capable of telling himself no, even when nobody else is there to tell him no. I think of this in the military sense as well. If you're occupying a defensive position, maybe it's a night location or simply a piece of ground worth protecting, you don't leave every avenue of approach completely open and then just hope nothing comes through. You identify where the threats might come from. You establish your boundaries. You put protections in place before the threat actually arrives. You don't wait until somebody's walking through your position to suddenly decide that maybe you should have prepared for it. I think we sometimes treat certain areas of our lives the same way. Don't rely entirely on willpower and then act surprised when eventually your willpower runs out. Build the boundaries you need before the temptation arrives. If you're constantly losing hours on your phone, put a screen timer on it. If work continually consumes your entire life, decide which hours you're going to work and which hours are for rest. Budget your money in different areas of your life before you have the opportunity to spend it. Decide when you're going to train before motivation becomes part of the equation. Have a time for prayer rather than simply hoping you will eventually find time for it. These are all simple things, but something to really think about. The goal isn't to create some miserable prison of routines where every 15 minutes of your existence is scheduled and you can't do anything spontaneous. I don't want that life either. The goal is to protect and design your life around what you've already decided matters to you. I think a perfect way of looking at it is to harden the borders around the things you don't want entering your life, so you can protect the things that you actually care about. And I think that leads into perhaps the most important part of it, for me personally, which is that order creates room for faith. Modern life will naturally fill every empty space you give it. That's actually something I've been thinking about quite a lot lately. Sometimes I wonder what really took up all of my time as a kid or a teenager. Where did all that free and spare time go? Before all the responsibilities, before constantly checking things, before having all these different things to manage, what did I actually do with all those hours? You somehow spend an entire afternoon doing almost nothing and it didn't feel like you wasted it at all. And now you can wake up and somehow the entire day is gone. There's another message, another email, another video, another task. Your to-do list is forever endless. If you don't deliberately make room for the things that matter, somebody else will happily take that time from you. That's just the nature of it. For myself, one of the most important things that matter to me now is having time and room for God. Most of my whole being as of late has been positioned around that, and I don't want faith to become something I continually say I'll get to later. I'll pray later, I'll read scripture when I got the time, I'll sit down and actually think about these things once everything else has been handled. Because everything else is never completely handled. There will always be something else. Instead, I think the important things need to be built into the structure first. Pray in the morning and at night, scripture at a designated time, church, quiet reflection, actually leaving some space where there isn't something playing in my ears or sitting in front of my eyes. And I find it interesting that Christian life itself contains so much rhythm and order. There is prayer, fasting, worship, scripture, and community. There are also times to speak and times to listen. There are boundaries around how we're called to live, what we should pursue and what we should turn away from. And once again, somebody looking at that from the outside might see all those things as boundaries and think, how is that freedom? Surely freedom would be doing whatever you want instead. But I think that brings us back to the question from the beginning. If you cannot say no to something, are you actually free from it? Paul speaks to something very similar in Corinthians. Although things may be lawful, he will not be mastered by anything. I think that word mastered is incredibly important, because maybe the better question isn't simply, am I allowed to do this? Maybe it's also, does this have mastery over me? Does your phone master you? Does money master you? Does lust master you? Does comfort master you? Do other opinions master you? Because you could have all the worldly freedom imaginable and still be completely controlled by those things. You could work for yourself, have plenty of money and answer to practically nobody, and be able to travel whenever you want, while still not possessing the discipline to tell yourself no. That's where I think the Christian freedom starts to look very different from the freedom what we're normally sold. There is obedience involved. There is sacrifice involved. There are things that we need to deny ourselves. There are moments where what we immediately want and what God asks for us aren't necessarily going to feel like the same thing, but perhaps that's where deeper freedom begins, because you're no longer being pulled around by every appetite and impulse that happens to appear. And this is where I think my military experience and my faith strangely meet together. The routine itself is never the mission. In the army, you didn't prepare your equipment simply because having beautifully organized equipment was the end goal. You prepared it because the equipment needed to serve you when the actual mission arrived. You didn't rehearse simply because rehearsing was enjoyable. You rehearsed because you needed to be capable when it mattered. I think the same should be true for the order we create in our lives. The routine isn't the mission. Having a perfect morning isn't the mission. Having a beautiful journal, organized calendar, a meal prepped fridge, and spotless house isn't the mission. Those things can help, but they are tools. The structure should serve something greater than itself. For me, I want that structure to create room to live faithfully. I want my finances in order so money doesn't occupy my thoughts all day, and so I can provide and give when I need to. I want my body looked after so I'm capable of serving the people around me. I want my work organized so it doesn't consume the time that belongs to my family, friends, and God. I want boundaries around technology so I can sit quietly without automatically reaching for a screen. I want my life to have order so that there is still room left for stillness. Because perhaps that's the strange conclusion to all of this. A discipline and order can actually create stillness. If everything is constantly falling apart around you, it's incredibly difficult to be still. If you've forgotten something important, you're late for something, you don't know where your money went, tomorrow isn't prepared for, and you've got 20 unfinished jobs sitting in the back of your mind. Even when you finally sit down, your mind is still running everywhere. But when you've handled what needs to be handled, protected the boundaries that needed protecting, and put the important things where they belong, you can actually breathe a little bit. You can sit down with your family and be there. You can open scripture without feeling like you're stealing time from something else. You can pray without rushing through it. You can go for a walk, you can sit quietly, and you can actually listen. So maybe true freedom isn't waking up every morning and having absolutely nothing expected of you. Maybe it isn't living without rules, routines, or responsibilities. Maybe true freedom is knowing exactly what you believe knowing what you're responsible for, having control over your own impulses, and putting enough order into your life so that you have the freedom to give yourself completely to the things that actually matter. Your family gets your attention because your phone doesn't control you. Your brain remains capable because you have the discipline to look after it. Your finances give you options because you don't spend everything the moment you receive it. That's the blueprint I'm adopting and I've carried forward with me. Prepare before you need to. Know your responsibilities, protect your boundaries, rehearse the important things, keep your equipment, your environment, and yourself in order. Always remember what the mission actually is, because order for the sake of order can actually become its own trap. Discipline needs a direction. The routines need a reason behind them. And for me, ultimately, the direction is upwards. As always, I'm Jaden Connolly, and thank you for watching.